Hello, and welcome everyone to the Voltamex new release webinar. My name is Sharon, and I head up product marketing for Voltamex. I am joined by Suhas today, our director of product management. So you've actually joined us in part two of our webinar. Hopefully you've come from part one. If not, part one presented by Andrew and myself is an introduction to the platform, best for those who are new to Voltamex. Part two here will cover a deep dive of all the latest features. And even if you're new, you skipped ahead to this section, you're still going to get a great overview and demo to really see our platform in action. So before we start, I have to show you this quick disclaimer on our forward-looking statements. But from here on out, I will let Suhas take over.
Thanks, Sharon. This is Suhas. I am the head of product management for Voltamex. Let's start with the vision that drives the roadmap themes for Voltamex. So the themes form the pillar to guide our roadmap and strategy for the product. So our pillars are high fidelity multi-experience on any device, the ability to provide true low to pro code application development with no limits, have a very powerful and secure software development life cycles for our customers and developers, and support open development and deployment strategies again to our developers and customers so that they can deploy on any platform of their choice. We have chosen a code name from this release because it's easier for people to remember code names than versions, and the theme for the code names for Voltamex product is famous inventors. The release we did in end of December last year is codenamed Curie, and further releases will be named after other famous inventors. The Curie release has a host of great new features. We'll be taking this time to dive deep into a lot of them. Again, we'll not be able to cover everything. I'll give a link to the what's new section at the end of it for more granular detail, but still we'll give you a preview of most of the exciting features that are coming as part of this release. Now let's start with the developer productivity section of the webinar, where we'll be focusing on one of the biggest features that we've introduced in this release, the micro and super apps, as well as talking about the enhancements that we have done to components. Now, what is a micro app and what is a super app, right? So to help understand this better, right? So think of an application. An application usually has several different features or modules. And what happens is typically a team that is working is going to be working, the team members are going to be working on different aspects of the application, right? Now, what if they could work independently? What if you can develop different parts of the application and test it, and if needed, even upgraded independently? That is the concept. That is what is being brought about with this concept of super and micro apps. So you effectively can split an application into different modules and build each of them independently as a micro app. And when it is ready to be tested as an end-to-end, right, not just your module, as an end-to-end application, you can then combine it into a larger composite application. For those akin to the testing framework ideology, this is something like doing a unit test for your module versus doing an integration test with the composite application as a whole. The concept of micro app and super app here at this release at least is focused from the concept, from the perspective of the developer and the development team, right? And the development module is done in terms of all these smaller package-based capabilities, which is called as a micro app, right? And this only is supported for reference architecture based application, not freeform, because this uses a close tie-in with the MVC controller and other stuff to do the intercommunication between the different micro apps in a project. So what are the benefits that you're going to get from this concept of a super and micro apps, right? One, you can have your teams working on parallel components or parallel modules at the same time. and they'll be able to get their application built, tested faster. If you want adding a new functionality to the application, you can just effectively adding another micro app package, and it will help faster releases. Say you're updating an existing functionality, you are still updating that specific micro app or micro apps that are involved and not the other things. So your testing and other matrix also is limited to the quantum of change. So you're effectively creating a nice structure for ensuring that the app that you're building is built fast and clean and is easy to maintain and upgrade moving forward. Right? So now let's jump into what is a micro app or a super app, right? So on the left, you see the current architecture where you have an Iris project on the client side and a Foundry app on the back end. Now, with this release, you have the option of combining multiple of these app, I mean, basically splitting an app into smaller micro apps, right? And this can be done both at the client level as well as at the server level. So you have a primary app, which is called as the base app, so to speak, and it is linked to multiple micro apps on the client. And similarly, you can link them to multiple micro apps on the server. Now, let's take a use case to understand this scenario better. Say you have an airline app has multiple uh, features or modules, so to speak. You have a booking a flight, you have an ability to check a flight itinerary, right? You have the manage flight where you can choose your seats and stuff, and you have your check-in where you have your boarding pass and stuff like that. Now, each of these are components within the same app as far as the end user is concerned. But now, from the application development perspective, these all could be built as individual micro apps. Now, when we say individual micro apps, that micro app, from the point of view of the developer and from the testing functionality, it can be completely independent. It removes the dependencies between parallel teams and encourages faster parallel development, right? So now let's look at the same use case of the airline app. Now you have a book a flight which has some functionality. You have a manage flight which has some other functionality. They have some resources that are in common which can be shared. They have some other utility components which can be common, which also can be shared. But now these can be developed completely independent of each other and tested. And if you're doing an updation for the book of flight, there needs to be no code change. In fact, you can even check the book a flight into a separate Git repository, manage flight into a separate Git repository, and combine them only from the point of view of building the final app that is deployed to the end user, right? And here we are also talking about the micro app can reuse forms, can reuse components like the change trip seats and boarding pass we have shown here. They have a shared navigation manager. The navigation manager lets you navigate across forms from different micro apps. Now, the navigation manager is an optional component. We'll come into that. Even the older way of working will still mean navigating still works. This just provides a more JSON based consolidated way of doing it if you want to, right? So this is giving a more detailed picture, but as they say, a demo is probably worth 1,000 slides. So now let's see as to how each of this is being built, right? So in this use case, we'll start with how you are going to add or remove a micro app. So basically, from this release, you have the option to go and link. And here we have daily health as the base app, activity and resources as two micro apps that are linked. It is connected to the Foundry backend app called as daily health as well, right? And you can go to the project and link any other micro app from the workspace. And remember, whatever app you're linking has to be reference architecture as well. And here I just added another app called as Checkup. It adds all the dependencies. And now Checkup is a new module that is available, which is going to be adding, say, blood glucose and stuff for the existing health application. Now I can go to the project and create a new project, say, for adding reminders for something like that. So I create a new application and add that as well as another micro app to the same base app. Now that is net new functionality, and for this I just created a form for FRM reminders. So we see that how easy it is to integrate multiple of this. Now also in the Foundry side, you have the same thing. You have the ability to have one base app as well as multiple micro apps. Just going to the Foundry console to show the same. So you have daily health with some APIs, and now we go to the managed links apps, and you can see the checkup and resources, which were two modules or two micro apps, have already been linked. I can go and link more apps. Any of the linked apps, the services will be available to the current app. So basically, all the micro apps have access to the services in all the linked apps on the Foundry. Right. Now let's go and look into. Okay, that is the scope of this video. Now let's look into some more pieces of micro app in the next video. So we just saw how to add, how to integrate, how to link. Now within the different micro apps, you have further capability on resource sharing. So basically you can go to micro app configuration and choose whether to hide a project, which means you'll not be visible in the workspace. You can choose to enable to resource share. And remember, when you share the resources, you are creating basically a tight dependency between the shared apps. Okay, so it's a hard dependency. And once you enable resource share, you have to remember that you cannot, remove app A and B if they are sharing the resources. So now you have the checkup, which is sharing the resources with this. I can reorder them for easier viewing in my console, in my Iris workspace, that is. I can publish this and preview all the micro apps together as well. And so here I'm seeing a preview of this app. I built the code and I'm previewing it on my device on the right side. So I'm basically entering my username password. Now you can see that it logged into the application. So the checkup here is from the checkup module that we added to the app. The other home screen was from the base app. So each of them, as you see, is using different sections. The profile is from another app, and they're all sharing and working together as one consolidated app. The other thing to remember here is you can also exclude an app when you're building, right, from the build, or you can choose to just build one of them. That way, if you want to selectively test one or two of the pieces, you can do that, and you can, say, for example, bypass your login and start from a form in the middle directly too, right? So this helps you, though you're building it as micro apps, to test pieces selectively from one project view. Now let's move on to the next section of micro app. Now, once you have created the base app and the linked micro apps, you can import and export them as a group or as individual. So here we see that you can export this as a local project. And when you are exporting, it asks the question whether you want to export only the primary application or all the linked micro apps along with its services. You can choose to do that. And once you have done that, when you import again, it imports all of the linked micro apps together. So here we are doing the same. We are importing from that archive and we'll have all of them together, right? So the export and import capability also are available for this. And now we are going into Navigation Manager. So Navigation Manager is basically a new option which is not just available for micro apps. It is available for non-micro apps as well. So here the idea is that we are defining a JSON template which says what is the app name and what is the friendly name, and basically creating a navigation structure, and then using a common handler whenever you have to navigate to a form. And here within this, you can have the apps across different of your micro apps, right? And you can have some simple navigation structure which always goes to the same function and based on a condition decides which form to navigate to. So again, this is an optional feature that has been added. So here we'll just see we have the JSON and the JS which is showing that, and we have a simple structure like, okay, for the callback config, this is what is being passed, some parameter, and based on the parameter it decides whether to navigate, and it is using that config JSON to move across them, right? And you have different navigation models and controllers for each of the form factors. Like in the same application, mobile and desktop, web and tablet will have different, because they can have different screen navigations. So this helps you control and manage all of them in one place. Again, this is an optional feature that is being released with 9.5, right? Now, to list, we saw a lot of features that came as part of the micro apps, super apps, right? So you can open a single micro app project for focused development or testing. You can combine multiple micro apps into a composite or super app project. You can manage backend Foundry services at the micro application level. You can use the navigation manager to control integration between the different micro applications. You can selectively build a subset of the micro apps. You can define resource sharing between them. And we also added variables logic for them. We also saw that you can import or export composite projects containing micro apps, reorder the micro apps, link or unlink them. IntelliSense, of course, supports the new APIs that we have added for this. And further down the lane in the Devops section, we'll also see how to create test suites across the different micro apps, as well as exporting themes at the composite or super app level, right? Now let's move on to the next section. Extensibility is again one of the core things that we are trying to support or enhance continuously. The base idea for extensibility is that we usually have an application being built by a team, but that is not the same team that is always going to maintain it. It is going to be taken up, if it is across different global regions, by different regions. It might be built by one team, maintained by another team. Now, you don't always know what part of the app is supposed to be extended, what is core, what you want to lock. So now we have added several layers to be able to support this extensibility at different layers, like form controller, component, and backend. We'll go across all three of them at different sections of this session itself. Now let's start with the first one, form controller. So basically, in the reference architecture, which is close to the MVC, you have a controller for every view or for every form that is there in the application. Now you might want to extend that controller logic. And when you are extending, you have to remember that you are changing the order of precedence. Basically, what is there in your extension will have a higher priority than what is there in the class that you are extending. Okay, you can copy and paste, you can reference the form controller, and this way what happens is, if you are modifying, you know that you are still modifying the piece that you are extending, and you're not affecting the core which is being referenced by the other pieces of the code, right? So now let's look at a quick demo of how this works, right? So here I have an app which has an identity details controller. Okay, now it has some functionality. It is generating a segment on the screen. Now we are just running the preview of that to show the different sections on the right side, right? Personal information, product selection, so to speak. Now I go back to the project and then create a new extension for that. And that extension, I am going to copy all the logic that is there in the main. I am not modifying the main extension. I'm leaving it as it is. I'm just replacing the new control extension, and I'm modifying what I want modified in the extension that I just created. So for example, I'm changing two segment labels just for quick demo purposes, right? So I saved that extension, and then I rebuild my application and run it. And now we see that the changes that we made in the extension are applied and it is visible, right? So this gives us easy ability to extend form controllers. Now let's move on to components resource management. So component is basically one of the building blocks of any good application is promoting reusability. Component is a module which can have both client and server-side code as part of one component. You can reuse the same component in multiple places. We support components with contracts, without contracts, and stuff. So components have been around in VoltaMX for a very long time. In this particular release, what we have done is we have enhanced component resource management. And by that, we have, for example, when you are importing a component and the same component exists, we have more enhanced conflict management. And this works for projects, form templates, as well as components. Okay. And we'll just see a quick video of how this works. We also have added a new property for components. Now going to the demo, right? So say I have a dashboard with lot of charts, and each of the charts is a form. Is a component, right? So I'm taking a particular component, and that component I am exporting just for the purposes of showing the conflict management. So I exported it and I'm re-importing. It is going to be already present in the system, so it is going to have conflicts. So I'm importing it, and I'm importing the form as is. As I said, it works for forms or templates or components. And it says ignore or reuse the component, or do you want to create a duplicate? I can choose to do either. I can choose to apply to all components within that form as well. I choose to ignore, use the component, and then it goes by component in that form. Then I say, okay, apply to all components, and it has now been able to import the dependencies. So it has further dependency, and there it is asking, do I want to duplicate or not? And that shows the conflict management. Now we have added a new property called as color. So the components can have parameters being passed. Earlier, stuff like color was passed as a string with the hexadecimal value. Now you can actually choose the color directly, as we are showing here, because it is more visual for us to see the color when you are seeing the, especially for stuff like anything which has a background. It is very easy to visually see it. So now you can see the color properties directly showing up as a property for component, right? Moving on, we have also added the ability to extend components using iris, right? And just like we saw the controller extension a while ago, we'll go into this and see how the component extension works. Let's see components, right? So components, we have added a new feature in this release to support multiple views. So say you have a login form, right? Based on the user, you might want to show different views. So I have the same thing. You can have 3 different views for the same form, right? There is a native theme, there is a purple theme, there is another theme. So I have 3 different themes, which are 3 different views of that same component. So this is a new functionality that is released as part of this. I can go and add more views. I can choose to make any view that I add as a default view, right? I can copy existing views to the same, right? That is, I don't have to create something from scratch. I can duplicate an existing view as well. And anytime I create it, you get the appropriate controllers as well. So here I'm showing the use case of duplicating an existing thing. If I just want to slightly modify it, and you see everything, the modules has the controller. So I have a business controller, which is how I'm going to manage the common logic across all the different controllers across each of the views, because each of the view is having specific functionality. But if I want to have some business logic across, I'm going to manage it in the business controller. And as you can see here, once I've created a business controller, I cannot create another business controller for the same component, because the idea is I want only one place to control my business logic and not go and do it in each of the different views. And this same business controller also, I can go and extend it once for the extensibility theme that we just spoke about earlier. And here again, I can only create one extension. Once I create an extension, the create new extension is disabled, as you can see. So basically, this speaks about the component extension, multiple views, business controller, and how we create business controller extensions, right? Now let's move on. So from the perspective of components, we also have enhanced it in terms of nested components. We have supported nested components for a while. Nested component is where you have one component within another, so to speak. Now what we have added in this release is ability to expose a child component as a widget node within the parent component. And you can also organize the parent components properties based on the child components and their functionality. You can allow configurability of the child component properties onto the parent component without any other changes, right? So basically what this helps is it helps create more complex components or interdependent components to be created with much more ease of use, right? Now let's move on to the next theme, which is basically some of the features that we have added, which is enhancing the end user's application experience. Let's start with simplified app rebranding. So, app rebranding, this feature, what it does is basically lets you quickly change the look and feel of an application at runtime. And this is only dealing with typography. Basically, you can define color palettes, typography, fonts, stuff like that. It is not going to change business logic, but it is look and feel. So items that I'm showing here, right? And these can be applied as widget properties at runtime. And to enable simplified app rebranding, one of the other features that we brought in was the concept of a style constant. Okay, so now styles can be used as constants. Okay, so you can create a primary color style as a constant. You can that primary color can be single color. It can be gradients. You can export and import the style content constant list across themes and across projects. So basically, if I have a standard color theme to follow for this app as a whole, I can just import and export it and use that to quickly switch the skins and the themes of the entire application, right? And basically, this is allowing enhanced structure for ease of programmatic application. Now, let me just show you this to make it much more clearer as to how this whole thing works, right? So we have this application um, which has different skins, right? And we have this new section called as style constants. So I can export or import, and here let me see, I have some fonts, I have some colors. So I can go and look at the primary color, and then you saw the application was blue, right? So I change it. I can change it from single color, choose the color, or choose the gradient and stuff. I have a secondary color, and I have a font. So I can go and add a new font for a specific type of widget, and I can choose what is the type of the font, what is the color it is going to have, what is the font family, what size, whether it has to be bold or normal, is there any other style that you want to add. Basically, all the attributes of that font, I am defining it here. Then I can go to my specific skin, for example, here, and in that skin, I can ask it to use the specific font family as the style that I just defined, which is the field type font instead of a specific font, and it applies all of this, right? Or I can choose the primary font. You can see the UI changing on the left based on what I am setting. So I can use all my skins to use this, right? So same goes for a background theme. I have, instead of setting a specific color, I am going to choose it as the primary color or some whatever constant that I've defined. The primary color is just a name I've given. You can give whatever name. You can give hundreds of constants in the same application if you want. So I'm just changing for the purpose of the demo, from blue to a grayish background. And you see, just changing that one thing change the entire look and feel of the application, because they're all using that constant in their themes, right? Now I can apply a different gradient, and you can see that immediately taking effect as well. And the application immediately reflects all the changes because it is treating the whole thing as a variable now that I can set at runtime. So this gives you the idea of how constants and how this color works, right? Now let's move on to the next, where we are going a bit more detail into how this style constant is set, right? So basically, we said I created this, I can export this. Say I want another project, that all the projects that I'm defining for this customer has to look and feel the same way. I export just the style constants out of this, import it into another one, right? And I can now have my application, right? So go back to style constant and import what I exported from another project, just the constants. So I get all the colors and schemes and fonts and automatically apply them. So the look and feel of the new application is now having that, right? So of course, if I have the same name used, it is going to create a duplicate. But if you're following unique names, it makes it much easier, right? So this gives you the how you can now start using style constants uh, to ensure the applications are consistent. All the applications are consistent to a branding theme, so to speak. Now let's move on to the accessibility section, right? So accessibility is an area that is very important for uh, for a particular section of applications, right? And VoltMX was even earlier compliant with the WCAG 2.2 standards. With this release, we've also added support for 2.1 standard. A lot of enhancements have gone into this from the tooling perspective. And again, the accessibility enhancement is for the application built with VoltMX. We have added video widget captioning, focus order and navigation via keyboard, reflow of widgets, to be compatible with the screen reader, adding customizable tag names, improved tooling support, as well as assigning accessibility attributes using the internationalization keys. Right? Now let's look at a quick demo to see the enhancement made from the accessibility perspective. Right? So we have now accessibility config on the right, as you see. That is a project level setting. You can choose to enable it, and that shows up, and it shows up in every form. And you can use that to set your tab order, tag names, high-18 keys, hints, and you can even set your ARIA accessibility JSON config there, right? So basically, all the configurations that you need to make is available, right? To make the app more accessible. So we just built an app preview of that app, and we are going to run an accessibility check using the built-in Lighthouse in Chrome. So I'm running the Lighthouse report for specifically for accessibility, and it is running the report, and we see that it has given 100 score for us on the accessibility, which means the app is completely accessible. We also have updated our application guideline of how to make it accessible, because there are a host of properties that you have now at your control. We have specified what is the config, what is the addition that we made specifically for the 2.1 standard, how you have to do, right, with details of each of the tags to use and such. So this is a very detailed article that we have written. I would highly recommend that anybody interested, please look up WCAG 2.1 VoltMX, and you'll be able to find this article, right? Now, with that, let's move on to the next section, which is going to talk about responsive web enhancements, right? So we have added a new property to provide more control and flexibility when you're grouping widgets within a responsive grid, so to speak, right? And the properties are similar to what is present in a CSS grid layout, right? And it also supports breakpoint forking. Another thing, continuing the accessibility discussion from the previous feature, is you have at every breakpoint in the responsive web, the accessibility config can be different, right? So if you want to have a different view for 800 width versus a 1300 width, it is definitely doable with the configuration that is there now. Now let's look at the demo for the specific responsive web enhancement, right? So we have the same responsive web app here, and we have the responsive grid as an option for layout type. And now I can go back and I see the new properties like gutter and padding, which were not there earlier. So I can set for the container as a whole gutter, and you see the width increasing based on what I set here, and changing it. I can apply for the X or the Y to see overall, all the elements in the grid being rearranged. I can apply similarly padding as well. So this lets me So yeah, going on to padding, I can apply in terms of percentage or pixel. I can do it top, right, left, bottom, and I can see how the new layout features are helping in terms of a responsive grid. So again, this is another new feature, new option for a flex layout or flex container that is going to help with responsive web. Right. Moving on. Now, this is another very exciting feature, um, iOS home screen widgets. So, iOS came with this concept very recently of having home screen widgets. Basically, a widget is a part of an app which is elevating key content from the app and displays it on the home screen for quick view, right? So, and the widget can be of different sizes, small, medium, large. They can reload at different rates. Now, let me just run this video to show you how this works. So, this is the parent application, which is, say, an airline application. I can go and I've added widgets for this of different sizes. So, this is a medium size, this is a large size widget, and this is another large size widget, and this is a small size widget. So you can see different widgets can be showing different data. I can reload them at different times. So for example, you see the timer. Based on the timer, the data in this is changing, because I can choose to never reload them after displaying a last entry or at a particular time, right? I can deep link the parent tab through the widget. So if I click that widget, it goes to a specific section of the parent tab directly, right? And the home screen widgets can be designed from the iris canvas itself. So all these features are available now as part of the home screen widget. Now let's move on to the next feature, app clip. So app clip is another feature that we are very excited to announce. So app clip is another capability that iOS came with recently, where you can show or download or use a part of your application without actually downloading the full application. So basically, think of it as like a one-time, one task kind of an app, right? So basically, I'm at a restaurant, I want to order food, I just scan a code and I'm ordering whatever my coffee, or I'm at a parking lot, I'm scanning a barcode and then paying my parking fee. So it basically lets people complete a quick task from the app without actually installing the full app. The app part itself can be invoked by anything like a QR code, an NFC tag, a link in a message, even a embedded within the maps functionality, so to speak, right? It can be invoked anyway. And once that is done, the app clip card will be invoked and you can click and order the specific thing. You also can promote your full application to be downloaded as part of this app clip that you're showing to the user. So you still can have an option to promote your full application, but you're providing a convenient way for the end user to get their particular functionality done quickly, right? So let's look at a specific sample here, right? So I have a restaurant app. I'm in a restaurant. I'm going ordering takeaway food. I scan a specific QR code. I'm just ordering some coffee. I choose my specific coffee and place the order. That's it. I didn't have to download the app. All I had to do was scan a QR code, bring up a small snippet of the app, finish my task, and I'm done, right? So as we said, this can be designed as a separate project in Iris, and combined with it, all features that are there in the app clips should be present in the parent application. Again, the app clip is not independent of the parent application. It is a part, it is a feature. We are just highlighting it for ease of use for the user in a convenient way using this. All right. Now let's move on to more iris tooling and flare enhancements. Right. So from an iris perspective, we have done a lot of productivity enhancements. We've added ability to filter different project resources. We've added a simplified font search, new pinning and distribution tools, ability to choose the color picker instead of giving the actual values or dragging it. You can take a picker and choose it. You have ability to lock controllers and JavaScript modules. We even added the option to choose different build formats, because the newer Android version no use AAB, the older ones still use APK. And even from an iOS perspective, we have the intermediate KAR file that we create and the IPA file that is needed for the end user. So all these different build formats and stuff is something that we have done as part of productivity enhancements for Iris. Now let's look at some of these videos some of these features in particular, right? So let's start with filtering project resources. So here I have the new filter option at the top. As you can see, I can choose what all I want to see in my workspace, and I can hide, show easily, right? So again, productivity convenience kind of API functionality that we added. And then here we are talking about ease of font family searches. So I have a specific font family. I can search them much easily and set that. And now let's go on to the pinning and distribution pieces that we spoke about. I'm adding a flex container and adding a few labels within it, right? I'm creating a label and then I'm just duplicating it. And I have this new option now of choosing all of them and going into the pinning and distribution that you can see here. I can say pin to left, all of them go to the left, pin to center, pin to right, right? And I can do top, center, bottom, and I can do it at the flex container layer too. As a whole, distribute all the widgets within them using the same pinning and distribution options. So you see, it provides another way, and it is easier sometimes to be able to group things within a container like this. And here we are showing the color picker. So I'm choosing the color picker and I'm taking it and across a specific portion of the screen that I'm in, and then choosing that color specifically to be set. So once that color is chosen, I'm applying it to the background, and I can see the background of the flex container having the skin color that I just picked up. Now moving on, we have added a lot more enhancements to Flare. We have added ability to highlight active widget, right? So you have new widget properties to display focus on an active widget, active state skin, on blur event, and on focus event. You have now the ability to embed local videos in web applications, right? Responsive web can play devices local storage. We have made enhancement to the local authentication API. So we have new local APIs that directs users to enroll for biometrics like fingerprint and face scan, right? And the APIs are enhanced by adding these authenticators. We've also added properties to block pop-ups in a browser widget. When the browser widget is within the application, of course, we've added the ability to dynamically resize text area widget. So basically, as you keep adding content, the size of the text area can keep growing. This is another setting, another capability that we added recently. We also have added the ability to have autocomplete property for text box widgets. Hot reload is another quick developer productivity enhancement. Hot reload has been there for a while, but now we have enhanced it to support a lot more capability. So what is hot reload is basically an ability to quickly preview code changes without doing full build, not even full build, not even the build preview that happens. It is much faster, right? Now it supports components, forms, form controllers, form controller extensions, segments, and segment controllers. And this works with the reference architecture applications, right? So let's see a demo of how this hot reload works, right? So I have a very simple application where I'm having a single button and I'm creating the app and I'm seeing that the form is generated. Now I go back to my form layout and I add just make some change to that same application, and I am just pressing a hotkey, right? I am bringing up my keyboard and I'm trying to showcase. Yeah, So it is a Command Shift R for Mac or a Control Shift R for Windows. So I press that key, it immediately does an incremental build of that, and it loads the app preview in the form where you were, and you just refresh and your changes are there. So this is a much faster way for previewing, and this I hope a lot of our developers will start making use of this hot reload feature to improve their development productivity. Linting is another area that we have made significant enhancements. So linting is basically the ability to define the rules which is um, validating the code that is there in your workspace, right? So you can define several types of rules: max line, max length, max lines per functions, max parameters. It's basically to improve the readability as well as what you think is ugly or what you think is a warning, what you think is an error. You can even define your own rules for linting, right? And basically help your development team as a whole maintain a very consistent, nice looking code structure, right? Now let me show you a quick video of how this linting works, right? So linting is something that you can directly launch from the help section at the top. You can do it at a workspace level or a project level. So here there are several different rules already defined: default case, max length, blacklist, indent, key spacing. I can search for a specific thing. So I search for max and I'm like, find max length of a line, simple to demo. I change something from 120 to 80, save it, right? And then I reopen a specific file just to show that. So this file that I was in, I'm reopening, and you see it is now saying, oh, this is 91 lines, and it is showing that warning at the left level, right? And I can go and change that back to what I want, and that warning can go. I can change a warning to an error. I can turn off a rule completely. Everything with the power button there is basically turned off. So basically, this gives you a lot more flexibility as to how you want to view the code in your uh, workspace, right? So linting is another new enhancement that we have added. Now let's start with the foundry pieces of the webinar. We will start with business process workflow. Business process workflow is effectively a business process management or BPMN 2.2 styled support for long running processes that a business needs. So typically, if you take a service invocation, right, an API is invoked from an app, right, and it is connecting to something, getting the data back, and its job is done. The context is only alive until that service is responded to. And if you're talking about a user session, it is only valid till a user session. But typical business processes are going to span a much longer time, right? Somebody files an application, somebody else reviews it, somebody else works on it, somebody else is going to say it is approved or rejected, and then it is done. The whole thing can happen in a matter of hours, or it can happen days, right? So you need something to support long running business processes, and that is how the concept of business process workflow was introduced, to be able to support the business process per se, and not just looking at the context from an API invocation. Now let's look at the different types of workflow capabilities that Foundry supports. We have had support for the object triggered workflow, wherein you have an object, something like a ticket created, ticket in progress, ticket complete, and each of those state changes doing different actions, where that object state change is moving the workflow along. So that is one type of workflow that Foundry supports. Events is a way wherein you can have specific topics and post events to that topic, And that could be from the client application. That event can be triggered by Foundry services. It could even be triggered by third-party systems listening to event bus like Kafka. And all these events can be used to move the workflow along. And we also have added the ability to invoke a workflow itself as a REST API directly from the client, like you would invoke an integration or object service today. And it supports both synchronous or asynchronous responses. And it also has support for parallel gateway. Now let's look at how an event triggered workflow is set up, right? So we have this application. The sample that we are showing here is again a loan checking application. So here we are showing you can expand and resize to be able to see the whole flow in one view. You have an event which is starting the thing. It says which topic it is listening for getting it. I can see what is the application ID, what are all the information for the signal to start. For signal is basically another name for the event trigger, right? So it needs some information, and then it invokes a service that we have defined, and you can see how the input parameters and output parameters are configured for that particular service. That needs an SSN to process the credit score. After that, you are processing the result. It could now again be in a different topic it is listening to. It needs some documents. You are specifying that, and then you are specifying the loan eligibility criteria using a simple rule, and you're configuring to invoke the rule directly from the workflow as is. And post that, you are determining if it is eligible or not eligible, and depending on that, throw the appropriate event back, like approved or not approved. And this way you see how an event based workflow would work, right? Now the same events, as we said, could be triggered from the client application as well, or any other third party for this to work, right? Now let's look at some other enhancements that we have done. So we said that parallel gateway is one of the other enhancements that has been done. So prior to this, we had only an exclusive OR. Basically, you can do A or B at a point of time when it comes to a fork. Now we have added support to do A and B. So what this lets you do is allow you to do multiple series of tasks to be executed in parallel, right? So we'll take a use case and just explain how this works. So basically, at the point of time in your flow where you want to do the parallel activity, you will be forking it and setting the events, setting the list of activity that has to happen in parallel, and then join that fork that we did earlier, so that from that point on, from the join, it again goes as a serial processing, so to speak, one thread, so to speak, right? That is one task. Now what this parallel gateway helps is it optimizes workflow execution time, if especially you're having multiple tasks that could be done in parallel that not have a dependency, right? And you can streamline the independent tasks still in the synchronous portions of it where it is happening one at a time, right? So that way you can streamline sections of your workflow that can happen in parallel and that has to happen in serial, and you have much more flexibility in creating a lot more complicated workflows, right? Now let's look at a sample. For example, again, this is a very, very rough example to get the idea, right? To get the idea. So for example, say there is an airline app, an airport app, which is looking into all types of incidents. That could be a security related incident, an issue in the restroom, or some weather related event, whatever it be, right? So somebody created an incident, and there is a parallel activity. You're just thanking them for sending that, and then at the same time you're going to assign it to some alerter supervisor to go and look at the type of the incident and see, oh, okay, this is something that is related to a restroom. I have to notify the appropriate worker. And in parallel, if this needs multiple workers, I create different tickets and set it to, say, the janitor and the plumber in this case, who both need to work on that to fix that specific issue. they work on it, they accept and complete that, and then the parallel portion of it completes, and then you say, okay, issue resolved and end. We'll see another example shortly, but this is basically showing how you can have parallel sections, streamlined synchronous sections, all as part of one workflow, right? Now, another enhancement that we have added in the workflow capability itself is the ability to run a loop. So, what is a loop, right? So, say you are having some specific API that you are invoking, and that same API has to be invoked 5 times, 10 times with an incremented counter. So, I'm hitting a database, the database can only give me 100 records at a time. I have to increment the index and get the next set of records, so to speak, right? I have to run that iterative task, so I can use a looping and use that loop counter to invoke it, and I can run the loop sequentially, I can run it parallelly. Those options are available, and this way I can get more of the same stuff done where applicable, right? So looping where applicable, it is an optional feature available in every API. I'll show this as well as part of the demo shortly. So now, for example, here we are talking about adding, say, taking order from a party, right? For a party of people, everybody has a different order to put. So you're invoking the same API to go and hit every person and get their request for the for the menu, so to speak, when you're ordering food, so to speak, right? So just give an example of how this would work. Now, we also said that we have started support from the API perspective. That is, once we have created this whole business process workflow, you can just invoke it using a URL from the client API or otherwise, right? Just like you invoke an integration identity or object service today. And it would run that entire workflow, and it can support both synchronous and asynchronous. Now let's start looking at the synchronous response from workflow first, right? So you have the client invoking from the client using the Foundry SDK. It makes the request to the server, and in the server, you have an integration service type of workflow, and you have actually defined the workflow, and you have connected that to that request is propagated from the integration service to workflow. It runs a synchronous response, okay, and then provides a response back, and that is gone back to the client that actually invoked it. So if the whole at the end of the workflow you have a return type that you want to send, you can send that to say if there is a loan approval process and it just approved or rejected, that could be something that you're sending back. But you basically now have the ability to run straight through processing, right? The whole idea of synchronous is that the other party is waiting straight through processing, and that executes quickly, but it is supporting a lot more complicated workflow process because of all the bells and whistles that workflow service has, right? So this is a mode of response that we support now. The other mode is asynchronous, right? So an asynchronous, by its definition, it means it is for stuff that runs for a much longer time or slower responses, right? So in this case, the client is unblocked by using a WebSocket, right? When they are waiting for the async callback to come. So again, using the Foundry SDK on the client application, you are going to subscribe to a specific WebSocket endpoint, to a specific channel, right? And with that, you are going to then again send the request over HTTP to the integration service, and that request goes back to the workflow service. And in workflow, again, this is of type async that you have defined, and the publish client only events is thrown from the throw signal of that particular workflow, and that is received by the client application once that thing is completed. But immediately once the workflow is triggered, that instance ID is sent back to the client, and that is used by the Foundry SDK to track and listen to that particular endpoint, so to speak. So this is how the asynchronous response from a workflow works when it is invoked from a client. Now let's look at some samples of how this is set up, right? So let's start with the use case of a parallel. So here we are seeing that once somebody starts a loan application, there are a lot of things that needs to be verified. Your document needs to be verified, and your that is going to probably invoke one specific set of service with its own set of rules and input parameters. You are going to check the address. That is going to another service to check that. And again, all this can happen in parallel. We are not waiting for the document check to finish. And here I'm just showing how the looping will look up, right? If there's an option, you want to check the credit score, that is going to check another thing. And then all the parallel pieces are finished. You join it, user data is verified. Now I run a rule eligibility check based on the responses from all the doc status and address and credit rank, and determine eligible, not eligible, and run it. So this is just showing another way, the parallel gateway way of doing this, right? And now let's look at an integration service of type async. So we had a credit score that is coming back, and then we have an event, and it is pending some document verification that needs to be done, say by hand. It's taking time, right? And once that process has completed, the doc is verified, it goes back to the rule eligibility check as similar to the earlier scenario that we showed. So we just showed how a similar process, depending on, again, whether the APIs are responding immediately or not, you can do both the synchronous way and the asynchronous way based on the APIs and stuff and the processes involved in getting your workflow done. Hope that gives you a better example and understanding of how both synchronous and asynchronous workflows work, right? Now, let's move on to the next section of the updates from Foundry. And here we are going to look at some identity, API management, and connector enhancements. So from the connector enhancement perspective, we have enhanced the Red Hat Process Automation Manager connector for business processes. So we have expanded the metadata discovery for it. We have support for OAuth token management for Red Hat PAM. And we also support additional operations to invoke custom queries and task management APIs. Again, for those that are not familiar, this is just one of the type of connectors that we support out of the box from Foundry, and this is an enhancement done to that particular connector, right? From the API management perspective, we have introduced several new enhancements. We've added the ability to have a front-end API for object service, and you can customize the front-end URL. So basically, I might have a specific verb, specific URL pattern that is there internally, but I might be exposing that same data from the API portal to several different of my partners, and I might want to have a more human-friendly, more readable URL for them. So I have the ability now to customize that. I can even change the verb mapping that I'm exposing, like an internal versus external. I can expose REST style API for object services in the developer portal. And you can also configure which request and response parameters are actually going to be visible in the developer portal, because again, you might have 100 parameters, but of those 100, you are probably interested in only showing 10 to that specific end user from that API, right? The consumer of the API. So now you have another layer to filter those out, right? So let me now quickly show you a demo showing these, right? So I have a specific object service that is created, and I have a create verb, right? Now for that specific object service in the mapping, right? I go and I can add, you can see I create a post verb for this, and from the operation, I'm choosing a specific create verb, and in the advanced section, you can see all the new functionality that we specified just right. You have the front-end API, which lets you customize the object verb that you're exposing. You have the custom front-end URL where you can change, and you can also change the resource method on the right, as you can see. And you also have the ability to customize the documentation for this, the Open API specification, and this is where we specify the request and response parameters that you want to expose. Again, this is going to filter on top of the request response parameters that you have built in the original API, and this is what is exposed to the end user, right? So again, more layer of filtering functionality. So if you want to have more control over the APIs that you're exposing, you have that now. And now let's move on to the third part of the extensibility that we started with earlier in this session, right? So we have already looked at the extensibility from the component layer. We've looked at the extensibility from the micro app layer. Now we are looking at the service or the backend code extensibility feature. Now, just for introducing this, right? So typically what happens is, as we saw earlier in the case of invocation of the async and sync APIs too, you have the client code, which is invoking an API. And when that is invoked, it hits the server, and in server, when it comes to object service, you can create your own virtual application data model. That application data model is what is connecting the app data model on the client side to what the app data model is on the server side. It is defining, you define the mapping for it, and then you have the ability to create more customizations. You can create a pre-processing for pre-processing the code before the API hits the backend. You can have a data mapping layer if you want to do some, currency conversion, so to speak, or add some locale changes, any kind of data mapping layer changes you want to do. You can write a processing for that. If you want to do some post processing, that is the data that is received from the server, you want to modify it, you have the ability to do a post processor, and the connector is what is used to connect to the backend system of whatever it is, a database, Salesforce, SAP, any other system, and get that data back. Now with this release, we have added ability to extend a lot of these things. Again, the model of extension goes back to the fact that you want to ensure some parts of your app are locked down, and you want to ensure that a new developer taking up this has the ability to extend and make changes without breaking the app, right? So for the app data model, I can have a base data model fields, and I can have extended data model field. Similar for the preprocessor, I can have base preprocessor, extension preprocessor. Data mapping also has a base data mapping and extension data mapping, and similar post processor also has a base post processor and an extension post processor. So what this gives you is the ability to lock the base configuration to limit any changes to the base service, and at the same time safely upgrade the base service with the custom configuration, and make this maintainability, extensibility a lot more simpler, right? And as we said, we have added support for adding extensions to integration service parameters, object service pre and post processes. We also have added extensions for field attributes. For the same field, if you want to add more attributes, you have that ability now. You have the ability to do data mapping for object verbs, and you can add new operations in a locked app. So basically, if I have an app which has a service, it has 4 operations, you want to add a 5th operation, you have that ability to do that also now, right? So several levels of extensibility has been added to the server side of things. Another new minor enhancement that we have added as part of this release is from the identity side of things. So when you are invoking an authentication API using the identity layer in Foundry, you now have the ability, an optional ability to track login failure. So what this does is you can say what is the failure threshold, like I'm going to accept 5 attempts before I lock it down, and after that failure threshold, and of course you can set a timer also as to how long that is going to live, right? And after that it is going to block any more request from that specific login ID, so to speak, right? So this is similar to how backends would do, but now because there are so many custom authentication options too, even if you're creating your own identity, you have this extra layer of flexibility. And this also provides an extra layer even if your backend has it. If you want to probably fail it at a lower threshold from the client application, because assuming the backend is considered catering to a lot more different endpoints for the same user, right? So now you have the ability to track login failures, and this can be done based on client IP or the user ID. And you can block malicious IPs or vulnerable user IDs, right, without affecting other users. So that is the idea of this login tracking failure feature in the identity. We also have added the OAuth login enhancement. So basically now you have the option to open the OAuth login in the same browser window, that is without opening a new tab or pop-up. This is a configurable parameter. You can still open it in another browser if you want to. It again depends on application developer and what kind of preference they want. So both options are now supported with this release. Now with that, I want to move on to call out all the different deployment options, because this is another area that we have worked a lot on, because our customers come from varying infra backgrounds, and we want to be able to support a large number of them so that we give full flexibility. Going back to one of our themes, open deployment strategy. When it comes to deployment, we want to be able to support our customers in as much of variety as possible, right? So going to that, VoltaMX supports, it has its own SaaS on cloud, and we have a lot of our customers on the VoltaMX cloud. We also support on-premises or private cloud. We also have added support for Docker and Kubernetes fully as part of this release. We support a variety of J2E servers, Tomcat, JBoss, or WebSphere. We support a variety of databases, MySQL, Oracle, MS SQL. We also support a different variety of operating systems from Windows and different flavors of Linux and AX. And the containers that we are releasing as part of this release as well, we have tested it in OpenShift for Red Hat, Amazon EKS, Azure EKS, Kubernetes on-premise, GCP, and we have released both a Docker single container that works on Macs or Windows or Linux, as well as the Kubernetes version for the multi-node, so to speak. And this container installation can be script based, or it can run via Helm chart. So with all this, we provide maximum flexibility for our customers to deploy the server in a combination that is most akin to their infrastructure and their IT guidelines, and so to speak. And with the adoption of containers in the world, and with the Helm chart, we hope it will make it a lot more easier and streamlined to be able to adopt the technologies as they advance. Now let's move on to the DevOps and test automation section of the webinar, right? So test automation, for those of you that are not aware, I'll just give a brief overview of the existing functionality to right after this. Allows people to record test cases, and let me just go to that and come back to this. Maybe makes more sense. So, so this is showing Iris on the left and the app on the right. So basically, I can just deploy the app, start recorder, and play with my app as I use it as usual. The code is generated automatically on the left, as you can see, based on what I did. I can go and edit that code, make modifications if I want, but effectively the test code is generated without app developer writing any code. And the idea is to promote people to do as much testing using automation means, and that would reduce the time that the people are actually spending on testing, and also do test-driven development, so they can check this code as part of the code that they're checking into the backend, integrated with their CI/CD, right? And enable that if you change something and if it breaks something, you get a much faster result back, and basically make the whole process of application development a lot smoother. It has the ability to record, it has the ability to play the test cases. I can combine multiple test cases and create a test suite out of them, right? And this is using Jasmine and Test Engine behind the scenes. I can create a test suite with all the test cases I created. I can combine them. I can run them at specific time combined with CI/CD, and it will generate a report. It can even send email if you're using the app factory portion of it. It says what passed, what failed, how much time it took, right? And you can see the testing history, which shows all the success, failures, time it took. And if something had failed, you can click that and see where exactly it failed as well, right? So this is giving you the idea of how test automation works, and this works for responsive web as well as here we are showing the failure test case, and it is showing the exact line of code that failed, right? So it works for web, it works for iOS and Android native applications too. You'll have to, of course, hook in the application. If you're running it on your laptop, you'll have to connect it to the laptop. And so this is test automation capability. Now with this release, what we have done is basically added ability to create test suite and test plans that contain test cases from the micro apps. So micro apps, as we spoke in the beginning, is one of the biggest features. And when you have a micro app, it has several different linked apps and stuff like that. So it now supports ability to create test suites spanning different micro apps. I'll show that also in a demo shortly. It has ability to group failed test cases and rerun only those tests. So in the example we just saw earlier, one test case failed, but if there are multiple that fails, I can just group and rerun them instead of running all the tests. Basically, from an efficiency perspective, that is helpful. We also now support cross-application testing. And when we say cross-application testing, it is both testing multiple applications built with Iris at the same time using a test suite. At the same time, it can also support testing applications across different platforms. So I might have a web page or a HTML that is running on a different system, not built from Iris. I'll be able to combine this and that. For example, I have an OAuth, which is going to open a web page, and that OAuth page is outside the application, and I can test that as well as the application that is invoking it, so to speak, as part of a cross-app testing. We've also added support for code coverage with Istanbul, which is another code coverage test cases, right? So we just already spoke about the grouping and rerunning test cases. So this is more from the automation efficiency perspective. Now let's look at first the micro app portion of test recording and automation, right? So here we have the couple of micro apps, one with a list and another with the login form. It is a responsive web. So I am recording my test case and I'm just going through those application. I'm entering the user ID password, and you can see that the code is generating automatically as I am using the web application. And here you can see that it went across the different applications, and you can see that the first application is part of micro app A, insurance login. The second is insurance details page, and this is in FRM login 2. This is FRM list. So earlier it was just invoking the forms. Now, because it is supporting different micro apps and it has to know which micro app that particular form is, the form name is also getting added as part of this. So this is something to just show that test automation works for micro apps as well. Now, from the point of view, or another enhancement that we have done as part of the test automation capability is the ability to externalize test data, right? So you create a test case, and for example, I did a username password entry in it, right? So now what we do is we have the ability to create the data entry as part of a separate file. So you see the generated code here for the login, username and password. It has referred to a data.input text username, and this is showing that data separate file which has that data. So any data that you are entering, it can be externalized as part of this. So this lets you, say for example, test the same application across different users if they're having different roles, different behaviors, or if you are moving the same application, say from dev to QA to prod, and there are different set of users or different credentials, right? Basically anything which is user input which you expect to change, now it is much easier to change it without actually changing the test case itself, because this is all externalized into a separate file, and you can have different set of the same file for your different environments if it is changing by environment, and ask the test case to use the appropriate test case file, right? So this lets you test more easily, right? Another big feature that has come as part of the test automation capabilities as part of this release is called as page object model, right? So what is a page object model? Page object model is basically a concept from the Jasmine test framework, which is used, which helps in optimizing the code when the same widget is used in multiple forms, so to speak. So the POM file that is generated is effectively an editable JSON, which includes the key value pairs of all the widgets of that source page, right? Now, say I go and modify a specific widget ID. I do not have to again go and change my test case because the test case is using the widget ID. Now, because the POM is now giving a key value pair reference, as long as I'm not changing the key, but only the value here being the widget ID itself, my test case doesn't have to change. And I'll just show you how this works as well, right? So this basically eases maintenance of test resources and reduces code duplication. So let's look at how the page object model works with our test automation. So here we see the POM. So POM is basically a JSON. As we said, it has the path, it has field names and the description. Sorry, not the description, the key and the value for that. I can generate the POM files directly from the visualizer, from the iris, and I can generate POM files for each type of form, like responsive web versus client app and versus mobile and stuff. And here, this is the code that does all the magic. So once I have created those page objects directly from Iris, I can use this line of code, which is the page object model get page objects, which gets me that page object, right? And here, for ease of understanding, I have tried to show the old way of invoking. And again, POM is an optional addition. It is not something that is mandated. You can choose to use POM. When you are using POM, you are effectively going to manually modify the test case. So the automated test case is still going to use the widget IDs directly, so to speak, right? So here, for reference, right? So the older way, it is going to have the form name, the app name, form name, and then the specific widget, and then the widget, in the sense this is a component, and then the field within it, right? So that is how it was referring. Now for the same thing, what I'm going to have is effectively the path that I've gotten from this, which is the POM path, right? And then the specific widget ID. And with this way of referring, I'm always referring this variable called as button login, right? Now let's see how this is done, right? So they have this particular form which has a button, and that button is called as button login 4 on the right, as you can see. Now I'm going to change that to say button login 5, and then for the purpose of demo, I'm going back to the POM file. I can regenerate if I want, but this is just one line change. I'm directly going and making it. I'm changing that to button login 5, and I'm saving it. And then I have to redeploy this POM file for that to be picked up. I deploy it, rebuild, and run my live preview with the test mode for the test recorder to work. And then I play my test case, and as you can see, the test case passed because it is only referring to the key button login. It is not actually referring to the actual widget. So this makes it easier for me to modify, especially when using components and using widgets across different forms, and change something. you're still coding to a format instead to the direct thing. So makes modifications and maintenance easier, because it all goes back to that JSON file, which is a key value pair, right? So again, another optional component which we hope our developers will start using to make their test automation much simpler. Now let's look at some of the updates that we have done to App Factory, which is the CI/CD add-on that is available as part of VoltaMX. So we have enhanced App Factory and added support for Cucumber test scripts for testing the Foundry API pieces. We've also added support to build and deploy client and Foundry projects from the command line. We've also added support to overwrite testing data for each environment while executing test cases within App Factory. Now let's take some time to recap the content of the webinar so far, so that we can highlight what you need to keep in your mind, as well as look at some of the resources for you to move forward, right? So we looked at super and micro apps, which is going to make application development more modular and easier to maintain, as well as extend, right? We hope all of you start using this and promote parallel development, ease of maintenance and such. We also spoke about all the enhancements that were done for the BPMN 2.0 compliant workflow processes, how we have added support for an API, synchronous and asynchronous processes, as well as complex parallel processing, looping support and such. We also looked at application testing, how for test automation we have done test recording, scheduling, automation enhancements to externalize test input, cross-application testing, as well as paged object model. App Viewer is another thing which you, as an existing customer, you should already be aware of. If not, I would highly recommend please go and watch the new user, new customer webinar, the part 1 webinar as well. So App Viewer is effectively a tool for previewing the application built with Iris. In this release, we also added a tablet version for it. We spoke about hot reload capability, wherein you can quickly preview by just pressing Command Shift R or Control Shift R to preview the changes that you're doing in the application. We saw app clips, which is a functionality to do a single task from an application even without downloading the application. We saw how you can create home screen widgets for iOS apps and use different sizes for seeing content. We saw about the new pinning and distribution capabilities for widgets. We also looked into all the containers and the Kubernetes containers available in AWS, Azure, GCP, and such. We looked at the component enhancements, where we now have added support for multi-view component, as well as the nested component enhancements, as well as the extension pieces. We also looked at simplified app rebranding along with the style constants, which lets you change the look and feel of an app at runtime by exporting and importing themes and making these much simpler to manage, so that you don't even need a professional developer, so to speak, to rebrand the app easily. We also looked at the enhancements done to the accessibility section and how we support both WCAG 2.0 and 2.1, and showed you the article doing all that. We spoke about the different types of extensibility from the controllers, from the components, as well as from the server-side code. We also looked at some of the API management enhancements, which let you do custom front-end URLs, custom verbs, and such. From the resources perspective, we talked about a lot of things, right? Again, there were a lot of features discussed, a lot of demos, but still this does not cover everything. I'm going to show you this link. So we have released a lot more features than we have had time to cover as part of this particular session. So there is a what's new page in our documentation, which goes into detail about all the new features that are released as part of the 9.5 or Curie release. It will have link to go directly to the documentation also from here. So we have the micro apps and all the enhancements that happened as part of it, the test automation pieces, configuring style constants, right? Productivity enhancements, component enhancements, containers, and it goes into minutiae of a lot more detail than what we have been able to cover. I would highly recommend that you please go and check this out. For example, we were not able to talk about SSL pinning updates in this call, or improvement to the service monitoring, right? So there are lots of features that we have still not been able to cover. Would highly encourage, please go and check this out, and this will give you a lot more detail about the volume of content and changes that has gone as part of this release that we hope you all start using right away. If you're a new customer or if you want to try it, please, there is a trial part of the Voltamex cloud. You can sign up. It is very easy. You'll have the cloud within a couple of minutes. It needs a business email. So just wanted to promote that as well. And if for all existing customers, please try to upgrade at least your development environment to 9.5 to start at least making use of the latest features. And you can, of course, if you're on the Voltamex cloud, you can reach out to the cloud team to request upgrade. If you're an on-premise, you can download the latest installers from the FlexNet, and you can install and upgrade your systems. I would like to thank every one of you for having spent the time to watch this webinar. I hope this has been very useful for you in trying to understand all the latest and greatest features that have come as part of the Curie release. If you have any questions, please ask your questions in the appropriate space in the web page, and we will get back to you. There will be a subsequent update to the blog with answers to all your questions as well. Thanks once again, and wish you a great day.